Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're doing well. My name is Bob Tremblay, and welcome to our fourth Back to School update, the live event.
Boa tarde a todos, bem-vindos mais uma vez à nossa reunião, a nossa quarta reunião para a gente poder estar discutindo sobre a volta às aulas.
Muy buenas tardes y bienvenidos a nuestra cuarta reunión para actualizarlos en la información acerca del regreso a clases.
Before we get started with our presentation and the Q&A today, I'd like to introduce our Portuguese, Spanish, and newly added American Sign Language interpreters and explain how the interpretation works.
Antes de nós começarmos, eu gostaria de estar apresentando a mim para vocês. Meu nome é Juliane Leles, eu trabalho para o distrito de Framingham. Hoje, nessa reunião, eu vou estar traduzindo para português e para todas as pessoas assistindo no Facebook, que gostariam de estar ouvindo essa apresentação em português, por favor, junte-se a nós no Zoom. Quando você entrar no Zoom, na parte inferior do seu lado direito, vai ter um globo, onde você vai poder estar escolhendo a sua linguagem preferida para você poder estar escutando essa reunião. Muito obrigada.
Y bueno, yo soy Mauricio Perea, soy intérprete en español, entonces si ustedes desean escuchar esta plática solamente en español, abajo en su pantalla de Zoom van a encontrar una burbuja en la cual pueden poner el idioma de su selección, en este caso español, y también va a ser presentado en Facebook Live, y vamos a tener ahora el lenguaje de señas americanas. Muchas gracias.
To give our interpreters a quick snapshot of who is here on Zoom today, we're going to launch a language indicator poll. If you're participating today in Portuguese, Spanish, or ASL, please indicate that now. This poll is anonymous.
Só para estar ajudando os nossos intérpretes hoje, para eles poderem saber quem está participando, qual as línguas que estão participando durante essa reunião, nós estamos fazendo um poll para que você possa estar indicando a sua língua. E esse poll é anônimo, ninguém vai estar sabendo o que você está escolhendo.
Nosotros, para tener un indicador de quién está escuchándonos en español o en portugués o en lenguaje de señas americano, estamos haciendo una encuesta en la cual solamente va a ser totalmente anónima, nadie puede saber qué es lo que están poniendo, así como la sección de preguntas y respuestas continúa siendo anónima. Gracias.
We're going to turn on the interpretation function now. Please make your selection below.
Iremos iniciar com o programa de intérprete. Por favor, selecione a sua língua abaixo.
Y ahora, para continuar en español, puedes seleccionarlo abajo de su pantalla. Gracias.
As we begin today, I want to remind everyone watching that this session is being recorded on Zoom and can be posted to YouTube following the event. It's also being aired on Facebook Live and will be available for viewing after the event has ended. I'll provide some information up front and answer some questions that have been sent to me as part of today's two-way engagement process. Behind the scenes, the questions that are being added and translated are happening in a Google Doc so that I can address them today during the session. We will then publish those Q&As to the website as soon as possible, ideally after the session has ended, but in many cases, it's requiring us some time to process the many, many questions that we do get in these sessions. Questions can also be posted on the Facebook comments as well. And once again, I'm really delighted to have our interpreters with us today as we continue to get feedback from our community and to make these presentations more and more accessible to our full community. Okay, at this time, I'm going to transition to a slide deck. I'm going to share my screen. And what I'd like to do here is just to talk through this work in progress, the back to school update. And if you've joined previous sessions, you'll know that this is structured in a way that breaks down the return to school plan into 6 elements. And I'll go through each of those today, and then leave the balance of time for questions and hopefully respond to all the questions that come up today in this session. So again, thanks for joining. If you've joined before, this is probably not a lot of new information from this morning, but quite a few new updates since the presentation last week. This is our 4th live webinar, and I'll be asking you for feedback later as well as to how we can make these future sessions more informative and more accessible to everyone, particularly as we consider the time of day. I know that the 10:30 and the 4 p.m. Slots may or may not work great for everyone in our community, but the idea is that we want to best serve everyone who's watching. And so if the time works better from the morning session, we did get feedback that an evening presentation would be preferable. So rather than offer 2 during the day, perhaps maybe 1 evening session would be how we would proceed. So again, I'll be asking for your feedback later in the presentation, but at any point, feel free to add to the comments and let me know what would make this work better for you and for others who may be watching and wanting these latest updates, so we can really do our best to make this good use of everyone's time in the summer months in particular, when the days can be hopefully spent with family and engaging in things together. I'd like to start with what I call a bottom line up front. This is the BLUF idea. And I think this goes through to, from my view, this summarizes what the talking points will be in the plan. This evening, I'll be presenting this very slide to the Framingham School Committee to frame a conversation about the larger 65-page document that's been shared publicly, and which we'll discuss this evening about how to proceed with reopening school in the fall. So the first point to make here is another invitation for your patience. This continues to be a work in progress, and as I've mentioned, the updates happen daily, and certainly we're trying our best. I'm trying my best to keep you as informed as possible through these webinars, and certainly new information will emerge, and so that may change the course of what we're proposing here. Number 2, it's important to point out, if you haven't been following this closely from the state level, recently the commissioner authorized the 170 school day calendar as opposed to the 180 school day calendar. And what that means for Framingham families is that we'll be presenting a new revised school calendar that is not on the evening agenda tonight for school committee, but it will be at the next meeting, as we'll need to adjust to reflect this 170 school days. The 10 additional days to get us to the 180 will be dedicated for staff professional development, and that will happen at the front of the school year, the starting of the school year. And that will be dedicated, we'll be working with our teaching association, our Framingham Teachers Association, on how we use those days. But presumably the time will be spent making sure that safety protocols are reviewed around COVID-19, and also how we are able to better leverage technology as we consider remote learning as part of this plan and other needs of our district in those days. So again, more to come on how the days will be spent, and the new calendar will be detailing for families when students will be starting their first day. That information is not reflected in the current calendar, but will be updated. Number 3, what's being proposed here by me this evening to the school committee, and which has not been decided, which has not been discussed in terms of negotiations with the Teachers Association, which are the next steps, but is a proposed, what I'm calling a graduated hybrid model. And in what I mean by that is that the restart of school would happen fully remote in the fall on the recommendation of Dr. Wong, Framingham's Director of Public Health, after we had shared with him our plan of a hybrid program, which he does support. The idea of a full remote start was time and space to get our staff back into school and then gradually bring our students back as we continue to evaluate what's happening with COVID-19. So I'm naming this to be a graduated hybrid model, which means a full remote start, an October evaluation, and I'll get to that detailed point in a moment, which allows us to prepare for a November hybrid start, which would mean some in-person and in some remote in a schedule for students, and also prioritizing some in-person support for identified high-need students, for example, on IEPs, individualized education programs, and for students who need and demand in-person services, and how we begin that. Again, I want to underscore that with all of these proposals, they're just that. It's a proposal that will be discussed by the school committee for their feedback, and then ultimately discussed with the Framingham Teachers Association as we narrow in a specific plan, which we'll present to the commissioner. Number 4, families retain the right to have their children continue learning remotely if they so choose. Now, this is different than homeschooling. This is if a family, for any number of reasons, feels that it's not a safe time for their child to return to school. The family retains the right to keep their child at home and continue to engage in remote learning from the school. Homeschooling is, of course, very different. That's a different program of study where a parent is choosing a curriculum that meets the needs of their child and requires a separate paperwork process. But that is different from a full-time remote learning choice if a family were to choose to do that. Bottom line up front, number 5. Framingham Public Schools is committed to the aspirational 6-foot distancing rule, not the 3-foot minimum standard. And here's the caveat, understanding that at times the distance may necessarily be reduced while students are passing. And so the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has allowed for 3-foot distancing in schools. However, upon review of that and actually testing how desks and chairs and that dynamic feels with 3-foot of distancing, we feel that 6 foot, which seems to be more of the standard industry standard practice, is the preferred distancing. So we call this aspirational because we know there'll be times where we can't always get to a 6-foot distance, but we know that it will be somewhere between 3 and 6, but we're targeting a 6-foot distance, which is what you'd see if you went out to the grocery store, to a gym, or to any public space, is what the standard is currently. If we adopted for a 3-foot model, my concern is that we would have students in very close proximity and staff in very close proximity, and thereby not being as safe as we should be, all things considered with the options. So we have tested the 3 and the 6-foot rule, and in this proposal, we are committed to the 6-foot distancing rule as much as possible. Number 6, face coverings for all students and staff will be required, and HVAC upgrades are underway. You may be familiar with the guidance around face coverings, masks, that requires for students in grades 2 into adulthood, but gives it to be an option for students younger than grade 2, so pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, and first grade. However, on school buses, students in pre-kindergarten through 12 must wear masks at all times. And so I'm taking the position here in this proposal that requiring face coverings for all students pre-K-12 in an abundance of caution and to ensure the safety of everyone in our schools. And so that is a slight departure from the recommendation language, if you will, in terms of being required in this proposal. Also, HVAC upgrades, heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems where they exist. We're looking to do our HVAC systems as they stand meet industry code. We are looking to make some upgrades to those systems by increasing the kind of air filtration that we use, adding air purification systems throughout our district, making sure that windows have screens so we can have fresh air ventilation, and also running our unit ventilators, our HVAC systems, much more frequently to move air and ventilate better than we would in non-COVID-19 time. So we are looking to do those upgrades, but just to underscore one more time, our current HVAC system is to code, is compliant, but we want to do better than that as we improve ventilation and air circulation to mitigate the virus. And finally, number 7, we've scheduled negotiations with the Framingham Teachers Association to discuss the elements of the proposed back-to-school plan. And this evening at 7 p.m., I encourage you to tune in, to watch, or participate in that meeting, as the school committee tonight will be reviewing the proposed back-to-school plan. Following that, so on Thursday, rather on Friday of this week, the district will have to submit the three plan option, the full remote, the full back to school, and the hybrid option. And I'll be asking for the committee support for a graduated hybrid option, which ultimately will have to be voted upon. And then we would make this information available to our community and posted and move forward. We have to have this submitted to the department prior to August 10th. Understanding, though, I want to make another point about the need to have conversations with our Teachers Association, as these are clearly changes in working conditions, and we want to work with our education partners, our teachers, to make sure that we've worked through all of these details. And so parts of this plan are certainly subject to change. This is the initial proposal, just to be clear. I'll move quickly through these 6 element slides that I've just alluded to, because I've talked about some of the points that are here already about heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, as I mentioned. Physical distancing, I spoke about that already, and making sure that we have training during those initial school days, in addition to technology support and other topics, the physical distancing and safety protocols. And then also, we were talking about cleaning and disinfecting procedures. This is spelled out in the 65-page plan, and we're going to work on a presentation that shows exactly what this looks like, the kinds of products, and what we'll be doing to ensure cleaning, disinfecting, and HVAC system operations. We think maybe a short video on that might be helpful as we educate our community around those efforts. And so that's new information from the morning's presentation, the idea of having a video to communicate more clearly what these mean and what this looks like in practice. School safety operations, I've talked already a bit about the personal protective equipment, PPE, and these are the required face coverings for students throughout the day. Clearly, we'll have to have mask breaks built into that schedule. This is obviously when they do return back to school. And then the additional safety precautions and training for school nurses or staff who work supporting students with disabilities. In particular, I want to use this opportunity to give a quick shout out to the Framingham Disability Commission, who generously donated clear masks to our schools. They're hoping to even get more of those. The benefit, as you can imagine, of a clear mask allows for students to see their teachers talking, and as you're learning to form vocabulary and words, and as you're learning languages, this is really important. And also students who need this accessibility as part of their learning, to be able to see their teachers and for teachers to be able to see students. And we just can't thank the Disability Commission enough for this generous donation and the time they've spent to make this available to us. And this is ongoing. We've been procuring PPE. We have a contract through the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, which allowed our school district very early on to begin securing appropriate PPE for students and staff. Though students and staff would be asked to bring their own masks to school each day, we would have an inventory to support that or supplant that if masks are damaged or forgotten, or for whatever reason we need to replace them. We'll have those on hand. Personal hygiene, hand washing, this continues to be the guidance, as you know, from various health organizations. It's one of the best ways to contain the virus and to prevent its spread. That coupled with the face coverings. And then finally on this slide is a medical waiting room. This is part of the ESE guidance, that we have a space separate from the school nurse's office for students and staff who may be symptomatic of COVID-19. We continue to emphasize the balance of not only the academics, which I'll speak to in a moment, but also the whole child, recognizing the challenges that come with not being in school. And understand that the idea of not coming back to school fully in person is because it's just not safe to do so, given our total student population and the space that we have at our schools and the means of transportation that we have to get students there. And so we're looking at this hybrid model as the best solution we can given the circumstances at hand and the safety precautions to which we must be compliant. And so socialization is a challenge because, as you well know, students haven't been with their teachers or in school and in those really important social environments since March. And so we want to make sure we're paying close attention to that by having our staff continue to check in with students and engage, and also create a schedule that is able to be quickly adjusted. And what I mean by that is if students have schedules, the sense of feeling the regular school day to the extent that we can, a start to the day, an end to the day, a predictable schedule that's different from just providing resources or a calendar that parents have to then move through. This is an opportunity for the extent that we can, two-way engagement with teachers throughout the day. We're hoping that having a schedule, whether it's an in-person schedule or it's a schedule that's remote, that allows for the same kinds of social interactions to happen with and among the same groups of students. So we're really paying close attention to the need of what schools present as social environments as much as they are academic institutions. And so supporting the mental health and psychological safety of our students continues to be a priority for us in all of these models. As we think about behavior, this has emerged, as many of you know, in recent years around school behavioral expectations. We've been hard at work in parallel to what we've been doing with back to school planning to develop a code of character, conduct, and support. And the effort here is to engage as many stakeholder voices as we can among our educators, our administrators. This is ongoing work that will engage members of our community and students with the idea of having consistent behavioral expectations across the district. We'd like to get to a place in our school district where we're moving away from school suspensions and detentions and punitive measures and being much more restorative. I suspect that as we look at face coverings and things in school, that becomes one more challenge area for us as it relates to behavior and discipline. But again, we're viewing this as teaching opportunities and learning opportunities to make sure that our students understand the need to keep themselves and others safe. And so I expect that we'll all work together in a way that brings our district forward in a long overdue coordinated set of expectations for discipline and behavioral expectations. So more to come on that, but that is certainly central to our work and has not been missed, despite the fact that we're working to figure out how school will happen in the next few weeks. With regard to school personnel, as I mentioned before, for professional development, we're working with our teachers to identify what their individual needs are around creating really engaging instructional practices. I want to give a shout out to our staff because, in March when we had to start and figure this out, we thought we'd be closed for a couple of days, which turned into weeks, which turned into months. And in that time, our staff, largely on their own, in some cases with guidance from our tech department, and then, of course, over the summer, voluntarily, our staff have really been doing what they can to come up with the largest possible toolbox to come back to school with, knowing that education would likely look different. And so I credit our teachers, our staff, our administrators for really thinking outside the box over these last months. And so we'll continue to sustain that professional development to make sure we're offering the best possible services we can, regardless of whether we're in a remote or hybrid or in-person environment. And also being mindful of the supporting our staff as they consider their own needs, as we consider the needs of our families and students coming back. And, I know that there's no plan that will perfectly accommodate everybody, particularly in this COVID-19 era, with a lot of unknowns remaining. But we're doing our best to put forward a plan that we think is responsible and that considers the safety of everyone, including our staff as much as our students. And so there may be times where our staff have exceptions to some of the medical exemptions, to sort of coming back to school as we return back and as we work with our teachers on how that will look. There may be need for staff members who are caring for loved ones at home or as a result of child care who may not be able to come back as we'd expect. And so in my mind's eye, in an ideal world, we would have our our staff come back sooner than later to begin working in our schools, teach remotely from our classrooms, where they can have access to their manipulatives and materials and bulletin boards, and to give our students a sense of what school looks and feels like. This is especially important for students who are preparing to come into kindergarten, who haven't been in their classrooms yet, and seeing their teachers for the first time, to give that very real yet virtual feeling for our students. And then to gradually begin to bring our students back, prioritizing, as I've mentioned, students with special needs, students who require services, in-person services first, and then gradually phase back. And we'll continue to watch with some specific benchmarking periods to know when we can proceed to sort of that next phase. Really similar to what the governor has done with the phasing of reopening the economy, is sort of what you can expect when, say, museums would open or when beaches would open. You know that assuming everything is going well, then that next phase would open. And so that would be a similar plan here, as I'll discuss in just a moment. The priority of what we're talking about is addressing the learning gaps. I would characterize what we're doing in the springtime and not knowing when we'd be coming back to school as crisis learning, is providing as many resources and links and videos as we possibly could, and to the extent that our staff was comfortable preparing those to get through and press through the end of the school year. My view of where we're headed this school year in a remote learning fashion is that we're going to be moving forward. We're going to be asking our staff and our students to continue with the standards moving forward throughout the year in whatever fashion that is, whether it's remote, hybrid, or fully back in person, which ultimately is the goal when it's safe to do so. So to that end, we would look to have structured school days, but we also don't want to have our staff and our students glued to a computer all day long. It's just not healthy, and there are other ways to engage in two-way learning and teaching. It doesn't necessarily require screen time, and so we'll work with our teachers to develop those plans. This is work that's been ongoing as we have prepared the 65-page document. And if you have not seen that or the many links that relate to it, there have been a number of surveys and other related documents. Those are available on the district website for your review. And certainly this evening at 7 p.m., those will be discussed in great detail, along with our central administration team, our senior level leadership team, and directors will be on hand to answer specific questions that the school committee may have or that are raised during public comment. We're also working on a system to provide students with materials, including Chromebooks, pencils, books, art supplies. You may recall what happened in March. We were in a bit of a frenzy to get as many Chromebooks out in the hands of students before everything was shut down. And before we had the opportunity to do that, we quickly moved more than 3,000 Chromebooks into the hands of students, including Wi-Fi hotspots, and worked with families to make sure that they had reliable internet access. In this case, we have a bit more time to prepare, and so it seems to me a great opportunity to connect our teachers and our specialists with our families as we work to get packages home, access to material packages at home for students to begin learning when they're in this remote fashion, and to ensure that we have enough Chromebooks. The district has enough. We want to make sure that there's one in the hand of every one of our children, that especially if they don't otherwise have a device at home in which to access the internet. Coupled with that, of course, is reliable internet access for families and other manipulatives that they may need in addition to the technology. My last slide here for the element before I open it up to questions is around our communication. So if you haven't done so already in the chat, I would encourage you to let me know if this live weekly update is helpful to you. Now our fourth one, but second week in a row, if this is helpful in terms of its structure. As I did mention earlier, the feedback from the earlier session was to move this into an evening hour. We'll do a single session instead of two, and then one in the evening hour, providing the same sort of accessibility as we have here today with American Sign Language, Portuguese, and Spanish accessibility. And so I would appreciate your feedback on that in the chat or in the comments. or you can tell me if that works for you or if during the day is continues to be preferable. The goal here, once again, is to communicate often and with clear, precise information as it stands today, understanding that that could change at any given time. Certainly it could change between now and tonight's school committee meeting, though unlikely, but perhaps after tonight's school committee meeting, there could be changes to what I'm proposing here today. The proposed, this is the last comment I'll make on this particular slide, and then we'll go into questions, is about the proposed reopening checkpoints. I alluded to this earlier. Rather than make a decision in July that sort of commits us for the year, if we're to say we're going to go remote all year or hybrid all year, the idea is that we find benchmark points where we can assess the progress of the health of our community and how we're doing with in our schools. And that's really important to us. And so rather than decide a year-long or semester or even a quarter or trimester as schools are divided, I'm proposing these 5, picking the year rather and dividing it into 6 parts. So these would be 5 checkpoints, if you will, the first of which would be October 19th. And on that, my proposal here, again, all of this is a proposal. The idea would be on October 19th would be the first checkpoint where we'd assess if we are ready to begin a November hybrid model, in which case we would assess that, and then that would allow families time and staff time to prepare for that new shift in what's being proposed here. Okay, so that's the extent of my slide deck that I wanted to walk through with you. Again, you probably have noticed that it's based on the elements of our back to school plan. And I will now to stop sharing my screen and open it up to questions. Give me a moment to open that chat. Okay, thanks for your patience. I'm toggling between a couple of screens here. And so now I'm going to go right into the Q&A. We have about 25 minutes set aside. The first question or comments here is, says the proposal in front of the school committee says that desks will be placed 6 feet apart where possible. For Framingham High School, can you clarify whether it will be possible to place desks 6 feet apart for all rooms? If not, what fractions of the rooms will be below 6 feet, and what will the length of separation for those rooms? So again, the goal here is 6 foot distancing. We're looking for, that's measured by desk edge to desk edge of the room. And so we'll have illustrations on that. And so what will happen is these won't be the only updates. Once we determine that this is the plan to proceed with, we'll then ask our principals to have regular conversations with their school communities about how this will look. So in this case, at the high school specifically, with 2,400 plus students, even if you look at a 50% capacity, because we would be dividing in the remote model, having a sort of a week on, week off model, you'd have 50%. And so that would pare down the number of students. We could not accommodate a full classroom with 6 feet apart in most of our classrooms. So that may require additional spaces to be used, library space or wherever it may be. We'd have to consider where we could make that happen. So we are looking at that, and we can certainly follow up with more specifics once we know exactly if this is the plan that we're moving forward with. And certainly the high school has been working on this very question about where rooms can happen and how accessibility for these rooms can happen safely for students. Again, we're targeting the 6 foot. It may be lesser in cases, but 6 foot is what we're aspiring to, not the 3 foot goal, although that is permissible under the DESE regulations. This next question is, I'm gonna take a breath here and allow our interpreters are working especially hard, and I have to remember as I speak, I tend to speak fairly quickly, so I'm doing my very best to slow it down today for everybody. How would school be for students with disabilities? And as I mentioned in the presentation, we are looking to prioritize students who have identified as high need, and that among those high needs would be students with IEPs, with educational programs. And so we would like to have students with IEPs begin an earlier in-person return to school. Ideally, again, this has to be discussed with our Teachers Association, but ideally we would have our students with the higher need students that we've been working to identify come back sooner in person to have the supports that they may require in person. When will we know schedules, weekly and daily? So as part of, schedules, weekly and daily, as part of our plan that is available online, we do submit a sample schedule in there to give you an idea if that's of interest. But certainly specific schedules will be developed and that will be shared with you by the principals in the coming weeks. So the first step is going through school committee this evening, sharing this proposal, getting feedback, making any adjustments, and then ultimately asking for support of a specific plan. And once that specific plan has been approved, that's the plan upon which we'll build. Although we have models built on all three, the full in-person, the full remote, and the hybrid, this will be now time to develop more completely those schedules. This next question I'll read is, I'm a concerned parent of a soon-to-be first grader. My issue is that there wasn't enough interaction with student teachers because the Google meeting was too big. My daughter had a hard time sitting still at a computer watching what seemed to be basically all YouTube videos. What about parents who literally work 2 jobs and are single parents who don't have the time to sit and teach their kids? Or parents who have multiple kids that can't seem to juggle all the learning components for all of their kids? I'm pausing for our interpreters as I'm watching to catch up. So as I mentioned previously, the idea here is that we're looking to do remote learning differently than what was done in this crisis learning mode back in the fall, or rather in the spring. This is more intended to be a structured schedule. Ideally, it's going to be teacher driven. And so that parents are always the primary educator for their child, but we are looking to take that shift and make sure that our teaching staff and support staff are the primary educators throughout the school day to help with just this point. We understand fully that this is going to be very difficult for families to balance. And we'll do the best that we can to give as much of a real feel to a school day as we possibly can, and moving away from resource videos and calendars of activities, as you saw back in March and April and May, and moving more toward direct forward driving instruction. Is there guidance on supplies that families may want to have on hand for remote learning? So in addition to the kits that we'll be providing for students, we will certainly provide guidance on supplies. Of course, among the most important will be making sure that there's technology and wireless access at home. And while we have sufficient number of Chromebooks to provide all of our students, we do want to work with families to make sure they have the infrastructure at home to access the internet for the purpose of remote work teaching and learning. And so beyond that, we'll continue to provide guidance. I know that's a bit of a shift from the traditional back to school shopping that you might be doing. So we'll give you more guidance on that as the plan evolves in the next couple of weeks. The next question is, if a family chooses to continue remote learning through the fall, would they be able to join hybrid in person in January or later, assuming cases are dropping? So the short answer is yes. Ultimately, we'd like to not have it so fluid that students are choosing, working remotely at home and then all of a sudden back and then back at home again, because teachers would want to plan for that. We also want to plan for as pure a cohort as we can make so that we don't have students necessarily working across cohorts, if that makes sense the way I've described that. But we do, the ultimate goal here is to get students and staff all back to school, all full time. That's where we want to be when it's safe to do so. So at any point, a family retains the right to have their child come back to a hybrid model or to step away from the hybrid model and continue full remote. We want to give that flexibility to families, understanding there's a lot of unknowns about the virus itself still, and certainly around unique family circumstances, which may be problematic for some. And so we want to give as much flexibility as we can in that regard. The next question, what will be done for children who cannot tolerate wearing a mask or who have special needs and may not fully understand? This is a case where we want to be working, of course, with our families and our students, and we'll have to work that through and provide mask breaks for all of our students to make sure that it's, as you know from wearing this, if you've been out, it gets pretty warm, especially on these warm summer days. So we have absolutely considered this important point, and there'll be breaks and accommodations made. To be clear, there's been some questions not raised here, but let me raise the question that's come up before around face shields versus face coverings or masks. And the idea of a face shield, to my knowledge, as of now, has not been an approved alternative. In many cases where you see a face shield that's in conjunction with a mask, and so that's not in place of. I could, however, see circumstances where in an instance like what's being asked here, where a student cannot tolerate wearing a mask, perhaps there's an accommodation that can be made in some way there, and that'll have to be handled case by case, and certainly with our health and wellness staff and our Department of Public Health as we consider the unique needs of children here. But to be sure, we know we need to give our staff and our students mask breaks throughout the day that will need to be built into our schedules. I understand this is a much more specific question, and we certainly want to make sure we are setting our students up to be successful and understanding the importance of why a mask is necessary. This is my next question here. I've heard from some school districts like Natick where they have plexiglass or something similar placed on all the desks. Is this something that we're looking at for the Framingham schools? I think every option is on the table as we continue to discuss this with our buildings and grounds team and with our staff. I can't speak to Natick's decision making or whether or not they're looking at a 6 foot or a 3 foot distancing, and perhaps that's why that may be in play. Anna Nolan, the superintendent, and I communicate fairly regularly, so I'll inquire with her about that. I know there are a number of plexiglass vendors who are looking to sell their wares, but again, we're happy to look at that and respond back. At this time, we're looking at increasing. If we're spending our money, we're looking at spending the money on air ventilation systems, improving the overall air quality and circulation throughout our schools as the #1 priority in filtration, air filtration, rather than just the plexiglass. Although it's a good point to consider. Will there be a deadline for families to notify FPS on their decision to be either fully remote or to go with the hybrid approach? And if hybrid, will there be an opportunity for a meet and greet with teachers in advance of the start of school? So in this question, I fully support that idea, and I'm happy to raise that as we discuss the specifics with our teachers about the meet and greet. I think it makes good practical sense for us to have an opportunity for engagement with our staff, with our students, to make sure they have the supplies, the kits they need, to make sure they can log in effectively on the Chromebook, that they have the wireless access at home. All these kinds of questions are probably best answered, in my view, and can be done safely in a very small, almost parent-teacher conference kind of environment, which I think could be scheduled. But again, I don't want to promise something that I haven't discussed first with our teaching staff as we work on these approaches. But I like that idea, and it's something that I would fully support. As far as making a deadline for families, you know, we're going to do our best to work with families to be flexible. And so following the ultimate approval of some plan by the school committee, and likely informed by the Department of Public Health, we'll be then issuing follow-up surveys and questionnaires to families. We'll want to know, one, whether or not families are choosing a hybrid or full remote. And also, it's important to us to find out what transportation needs there may be as well. And so one of the benefits of moving to a hybrid model like this is that if we're trying to do a full return to school with students, which we know we can't do because we can't keep that even that 3-foot distancing in practice, it would require an additional 150 or more school buses to transport our students. That's in addition to what we have now, and it's just not possible to do that. Not even possible to procure them if we had the $80,000 per school bus to do so. And so that's, we want to be getting as much information from families as we can. So we'll be asking in a survey if families are eligible, would they take advantage of transportation, so that we can try to accommodate as many families as we possibly can with the transportation that we do have available when we do begin a hybrid model. So I think there'll be some flexibility with that. You're not going to be, committal from day one, but we will be asking you so that we can begin to plan our cohorts of students. And so it's important that we have some indication from you early on so we can build out our schedules and identify which students are coming to school, which weeks. And that's the work that's going to be happening in the coming days. I think I answered some of the questions already about if my student goes to hybrid school, can parents choose to opt their student to learn remotely? And the answer is yes. You may choose remote education for the year if you so choose. We will be taking attendance every day. There will be grades. This is different than, again, I go back to the term of crisis learning that happened last spring. There's certainly expectations, and there are still time on learning expectations. So the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education provides very specific guidance on the number of school days and the number of hours in a school year that have to be met. And so while the number of school days has been reduced to 170, the number of school hours has also been reduced relative to those days. But these are not going to be 2- and 3-hour school days. They can't be. It won't be sufficient to meet the demands of time on learning as we look to put forward this schedule. Will teachers provide office hours for students, whether or not the students are doing remote learning or hybrid? We'll be sure to respond back to that question with our staff, and we did provide some office hours in the springtime, and we'll have to build into a schedule to see how that works for the amount of actual synchronous instruction, like real-time instruction, or asynchronous. But those are videos that are prepared by teachers that are made available for students at their discretion, and whether or not office hours can be built into the structure of that school day. But I would say that, that teachers are accessible. Teachers have been, in my experience, have been very responsive to parent inquiries by way of email or phone calls, and I would expect that to continue. There's a suggestion here that says it would be helpful to have these more targeted groups. For example, high school student families have one group, another meeting for elementary. Our needs are just so different. It's a great point. For today, it's really a very high level district update because it's a district back to school plan. But you're exactly right. From this point, once we get past the specific plan, Parents, families, students want to know what's happening precisely at their school. And that's what our principals will then begin to sort of take the baton, if you will, and begin that communication with families directly. So I appreciate the suggestion, and that is what's planned. Right now, I'm just providing the backdrop to all of this, as school superintendents and school committees are first charged with presenting a plan to the department that first has to have school committee support and Department of Public Health approval, Board of Health approval. The next comment is explorers have been doing a great job with virtual summer scene. Will they be doing something similar in the fall? Yes, the answer is yes. We have a great program with our explorers in-house program through our community resource development office, and those details are spelled out in the plan as well. And we can happily provide additional commentary in a Q&A document that will follow today's session about that. Next question I'm seeing here is, has the DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, said anything about MCAS requirements for this coming year? There's been some push from the Massachusetts Teachers Association, presumably American Federation of Teachers and others around MCAS and having an exemption for 2020-2021 school year. At this time, I'm not aware of any of those requirements being lifted. I don't know, though, if that will change. That will come at the direction of the commissioner. But right now, the MCAS requirement has not been changed, although I am aware that discussions are occurring about that. There's a question about repeating the start date of school, and just to underscore that important point, because the commissioner has declared a 170-day school year for students, that means there'll be 10 teacher professional development days out of that 180 we normally would have. So the first 10 days of school will be for teachers in professional development, and then students would then begin later. The directive, though, is that students, although we haven't finalized a revised calendar, students would not be starting later than September 16th. So we'll have to look at our calendar and see how we put those days into it. But that is the directive of the commissioner, not later than September 16th. And those 10 days are at the front end of the school year, if you will. And so we'll get back to all of you on the first day of school, what that means for the calendar adjustments. And that will happen likely on August 5th. I'll be bringing that before the school committee for their review and approval. We're coming upon our final 5 minutes of the session, and hopefully you've had an opportunity to weigh in if you haven't already, just as a reminder about the feedback on this session. If you think it's helpful, I'd love to hear that too. We've put some time, obviously, in preparing and planning for that and making this accessible, and I'd like to know your feedback on that, but also on how to make this better as we move forward. If we can take constructive feedback well, and if I can find a way to make this more accessible to everyone in our community by offering it in the evening or a certain day of the week, go ahead and put that out there, and maybe we'll make it work in the schedule that accommodates yours. I'm going to just scroll back for a moment on questions that I may have missed. I apologize if I didn't get to everyone's question today, and if I didn't, it's okay. We're going to take these questions and move them to a question and answer document, and then whether it's myself or members of the school team, we'll provide an answer to that, and we'll make that information available on our district website, and we'll make that available in multiple languages. So I would encourage you to check back frequently to answers to your questions if we haven't addressed them today. Only one comment. The Zoom meeting is very helpful and provides useful information. Thank you for that. And so I guess the prompt I'm seeing here is, would the evening time work better? For example, 7 p.m. So if that's typically when Framingham meetings occur. So if 7 p.m. works for you, we'll keep it to 1 hour, same structure with the first 15, 20 minutes dedicated to just an update from me. And then we can move into the Q&A And again, I suspect in time, you'll be much more interested in hearing from your principal than you will be hearing from me. But nevertheless, I wanted to make sure that I'm available and accessible to all of our families and staff. And coincidentally, tomorrow is our first, as a result of this remote environment, tomorrow will be our first ever full Framingham Public Schools staff meeting. I've invited staff to join me tomorrow morning at 7:30, and we'll all be providing a similar update today as I provided today, and also information that will be coming from school committee this evening. And so it's an opportunity. It's very difficult to find a way or a time to meet with nearly 2,000 staff who work in our school district. And so I've offered this voluntary meeting tomorrow morning for those who are able to pull away for a bit for a quick update. So one thing I've learned through this process is there's opportunities to engage. And I would argue that I've never engaged in this kind of two-way dialogue to this level with interpretation in multiple languages if it hadn't been for growing myself as a professional in using this technology. So it's a learning experience for all of us, and in some cases for the better. The last question before we close here, it's an important one. Can you help us understand what shifted your plans from starting in a hybrid mode versus graduating to a hybrid mode? That really came upon the recommendation of the city's Department of Public Health. As I mentioned earlier in the slide deck, and might have been missed, as bears repeating, is that Dr. Wong, who has been a great partner for us as we've vetted through all of the plans, was very comfortable with a hybrid approach, was not comfortable with a full return, and neither were we, and had asked us, recommended to the school committee and myself at that time to consider a staggered start, which I'm calling a graduated start to the school year by starting fully remote, and then using those checkmark points to then move into the hybrid model. So that really came as a matter of consult with the Department of Public Health. All right, we're right at the 5 o'clock mark, and I promised to keep everybody only until 5 p.m. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for engaging today. I appreciate your feedback. I appreciate your patience with us and flexibility as we work to figure this out together. I wish I had a more perfect plan that accommodated everybody's family needs. And I'm sorry that I can't provide that, but I do hope you'll view what's been proposed as in the best interest and safety of our children, of our families, of our staff. And please know that we'll continue to work this to find a solution. And I look forward to the day when we're all back together in school in person. So thanks again for your attention and for being part of this call today. And I look forward to seeing you very soon.